A powerful voice in the pulpit, silenced. A respected bishop, now facing accusations that could shake the very foundation of modern church leadership. What really happened behind the scenes of Bishop Ellis's shocking downfall? And is this the beginning of a spiritual reckoning for leaders who've strayed too far from the word? Stay with me, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see church authority forever. When a church leader falls, the ripple effects go far beyond the pulpit. They shake the faith of thousands and leave a trail of unanswered questions. And in the case of Bishop Charles H. Ellis III, once admired and respected across the nation, the recent scandal surrounding his ministry has left many wondering, was this simply personal failure? Or is it a sign of something much deeper rotting within church leadership today? In today's video, we're diving into the full story of Bishop Ellis's downfall. From the moment troubling rumors started surfacing to the final public fallout that stunned his congregation. We'll explore the uncomfortable truths that church leaders don't want you to hear, and reveal how this situation is setting off alarm bells in ministries everywhere. You'll discover what insiders are whispering about behind closed church doors, how financial, personal, and moral failures converged into one explosive collapse, and why some believe Bishop Ellis's downfall is a prophetic warning to the church at large. You won't believe who tried to cover things up, and who finally broke the silence. This is where it gets interesting, so buckle up. We're breaking it down piece by piece, and trust me, you're going to want to watch until the very end. Before the headlines, before the controversy, there was a man walking confidently in the footsteps of a giant. Bishop Charles H. Ellis III inherited more than just a church. He inherited a legacy. His father, the late Bishop David L. Ellis Sr., founded Greater Grace Temple in Detroit, Michigan, one of the most prominent Pentecostal churches in the country. When Bishop David passed, all eyes turned to Charles. Would the son rise to the challenge, or would the legacy crumble? And rise he did, at least at first. Bishop Ellis wasn't just leading sermons, he was building empires. Under his leadership, Greater Grace Temple grew into a spiritual and cultural landmark, boasting a membership of thousands, multiple satellite ministries, and a media presence that stretched across the nation. Ellis didn't just preach, he performed. His charismatic delivery, blended with a smooth, showman-like presence, drew not only devoted believers but also celebrities, politicians, and power brokers. His church hosted funerals for notable figures, major city events, and high-profile worship services that looked more like award shows than traditional Sunday morning praise. Then came his ascension to presiding bishop of the Pentecostal Assemblies of the World, PAW, a denomination with over 1.5 million members globally. At that point, Bishop Ellis was no longer just a local Detroit leader. He had become one of the most powerful figures in the Black Pentecostal movement. But with fame comes pressure, and with power comes scrutiny. People started noticing the private jets, the designer suits, the luxury vehicles, the corporate-style branding of a once humble church. Some admired it as God's favor. Others whispered concerns about ego, greed, and a growing disconnect from the real struggles of his flock. And yet, for years, no one dared challenge him publicly. Bishop Ellis stood tall, untouchable, until cracks started to show. At first, the murmurs were quiet, just soft whispers exchanged in the pews and behind closed office doors. But soon those whispers grew louder, spreading through the congregation like wildfire. Something was shifting at Greater Grace Temple, and it wasn't just spiritual. Bishop Ellis, once known for his bold sermons and uplifting messages, began to draw attention for all the wrong reasons. His growing appetite for luxury, from expensive suits to exotic cars and flashy stage productions, began to make people uncomfortable. While he claimed it was all part of presenting God in excellence, others felt it was more about ego than anointing. Longtime members started to notice subtle changes. The altar calls felt more scripted. The prayer services became productions. Offerings were asked for more aggressively, and some said the ministry had turned into a business. No longer was the church solely a place of spiritual healing. It was beginning to look and feel like a spiritual empire, with Bishop Ellis at the throne. Behind the scenes, several staff members and assistant ministers reportedly began resigning. Some claimed burnout, others hinted at deeper disagreements with Ellis's leadership style, citing a shift from servant leadership to celebrity leadership. There were even accusations that decisions were no longer being made prayerfully, but strategically, with profit, politics, and public perception in mind. Then came the allegations that really shook the flock. Multiple sources began whispering about misuse of church funds. Reports surfaced of Ellis taking private trips and staying in five-star hotels on the church's dime. While he never publicly addressed these accusations in depth, some insiders claimed that the financial books at Greater Grace Temple were kept intentionally vague, with limited transparency even among board members. But the most painful blow came from within. A group of older members, the very pillars of the church who had worshipped under his father, began to leave. Some did so quietly. Others confronted Ellis, urging him to return to the old way. But their pleas were ignored. Ellis was convinced he was evolving the ministry, taking it to new heights. In reality, the spiritual foundation was starting to crumble. Still, the public image was being protected at all costs. Flashy promotional videos, major televised events, celebrity guests in the front row. Everything looked shiny on the outside, but behind the pulpit, the rot had begun. And then came the controversy that would place Bishop Ellis under the national microscope. Not for his sermons, but for what happened live on stage. If there was ever a moment that brought Bishop Charles H. Ellis III into the harsh spotlight of national controversy, it was the funeral of the legendary Aretha Franklin. The grand homegoing ceremony was meant to be a celebration of a gospel icon, a gathering of spiritual giants and cultural heroes. But instead, it became the stage for a deeply uncomfortable scandal. When pop star Ariana Grande took to the pulpit to perform a touching rendition of "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," no one expected anything more than a moving tribute. But what followed shocked not only viewers in the church, but millions watching the live broadcast around the world. After Ariana's performance, Bishop Ellis wrapped his arm around her on stage. And it wasn't just a casual or respectful gesture. Cameras clearly captured his hand uncomfortably high on her torso, specifically pressing against the side of her breast. The unease on Ariana's face was visible. She nervously laughed, visibly pulling away, but Ellis held on, seemingly unaware or unwilling to let go. At first, some viewers wondered if it had been accidental, but the awkward smile on Ariana's face and the intensity of Bishop Ellis's grip told a different story, especially when slowed-down clips began going viral. Twitter erupted. Instagram flooded with reactions. Hashtags like #Respect Ariana and Church2 began trending globally. Within hours, major media outlets like CNN, The New York Times, and The Guardian were covering the incident. Critics didn't hold back. Women's rights activists, entertainers, and pastors alike called out the bishop for inappropriate behavior. In a church, during a funeral no less. But perhaps even more shocking than the act itself was Ellis's response. During a backstage interview, Ellis initially tried to laugh the incident off. He made a joke about Ariana's name, saying he thought Ariana Grande was a new item on the Taco Bell menu. That flippant, culturally tone-deaf comment only added fuel to the fire, sparking accusations of racial insensitivity and misogyny all at once. What should have been a moment of repentance turned into a PR nightmare. Eventually, under intense public pressure, Ellis did issue a public apology, but many found it lacking in sincerity. He said, "It would never be my intention to touch any woman's breast. I don't know. I guess I put my arm around her. Maybe I crossed the border. Maybe I was too friendly or familiar." That "maybe I crossed the borderline" didn't sit well. It wasn't a firm acknowledgement, but a soft dodge. An almost passive attempt to brush off what millions had seen live on television. The backlash wasn't just external. Members of his own congregation reportedly began distancing themselves. Young women who once saw Ellis as a spiritual father began questioning their safety. Critics within the gospel community, even those who had long respected his ministry, began speaking out, urging for accountability, transparency, and change. The scandal was no longer about Ariana Grande. It had become symbolic of a much bigger issue: unchecked power in the pulpit. A moment that was supposed to celebrate Aretha Franklin's powerful legacy became a public lesson on boundaries, consent, and the dangerous blending of spiritual authority and personal ego. And yet, despite the outrage, the coverage, and the calls for discipline, Bishop Ellis remained in his position. No formal action was taken. No church investigation was publicly launched. Just like that, the storm passed, at least on the surface. But the damage was done. His reputation, once solid as stone, now had deep fractures. And behind those cracks, a darker history was brewing, one that involved mistreatment claims, spiritual manipulation, and allegations that would soon resurface with even more weight. And that brings us to the next chapter. The Ariana Grande incident may have lit the fuse, but for many within the greater Grace Temple community, it was simply the moment the world finally saw what they had been experiencing for years behind closed doors. What had long existed as whispers in the sanctuary corridors and murmured complaints after service began to erupt into full-blown testimonies from former church members and insiders. In the months following the public scandal, more and more people, especially women, began coming forward on social media, in anonymous interviews, and even in online forums to share disturbing accounts about their experiences under Bishop Charles H. Ellis III's leadership. One woman, known only by her initials KS, wrote a lengthy Facebook post that quickly went viral in Detroit's gospel community. In it, she detailed years of subtle spiritual manipulation, inappropriate comments disguised as jokes, and frequent invasions of personal space, particularly during private counseling sessions. She wrote, "You start out thinking you're getting spiritual guidance, but it slowly turns into something else. You're complimented on how you dress, how your body looks, and if you pull away, you're told you're being too sensitive or not spiritually mature. It messes with your mind. You begin to question whether you're overreacting until you see it happening to others too." More chilling were the comments from former church volunteers who worked closely with Ellis during church events. Several individuals, speaking anonymously to local Detroit news blogs, described a pattern of behavior: prolonged hugs, inappropriate touching, comments about women's appearances, and even pressuring young adult members to meet with him privately after hours at the church office. One former choir member described a moment when she was invited to a one-on-one meeting with Ellis under the pretense of spiritual mentorship. She says the conversation started with prayer, but quickly turned personal, with Ellis allegedly asking about her dating life, whether she was saving herself and offering to be her covering. "It was manipulative, and I felt trapped. You don't say no to the bishop, not without consequences." These accounts painted a pattern that was hard to ignore. One or two stories could be dismissed, but a growing number of people, especially women, were now echoing the same sentiments. There wasn't just smoke, there was fire. And what made it worse, many of them claimed that when they tried to raise these concerns with church leadership, they were either silenced or shamed. According to several testimonies, women were told they were being disrespectful to God's anointed, or worse, that they were lying or seeking attention. The power imbalance was so great, they say, that speaking up felt impossible. It didn't help that Ellis's charisma remained intact in public. He was still delivering fiery sermons. He was still being invited to speak at national gospel conferences and featured in televised services. And he still had many loyal supporters who refused to believe anything negative about him. Some even blamed the women coming forward, accusing them of being bitter, jealous, or even tools of the devil trying to tear down a man of God. But others, especially survivors and advocates for church accountability, started pushing back. A local Detroit-based podcast called Sanctified But Silenced aired a multi-part series featuring several former Greater Grace Temple members. These raw interviews gave names, dates, and heartbreaking detail, highlighting how spiritual power was allegedly used as a shield for emotional, psychological, and even physical manipulation. One guest summarized it best: "This isn't about hating the church. This is about saving it. Because if people keep getting hurt and no one speaks up, we're all complicit." To add to the growing discomfort, a leaked internal memo from a former staff member suggested that the church was aware of at least 2 formal complaints made against Bishop Ellis prior to the Ariana Grande scandal, but that no formal investigation ever took place. Instead, the women were reportedly encouraged to forgive and pray. By this point, the question became impossible to ignore. How long had this been going on? And how many people had suffered in silence? It's not just about one moment on stage with a pop star. It's about a culture that, allegedly, allowed someone to use his position and influence unchecked for decades. And while Bishop Ellis continued to deny any inappropriate conduct beyond what he called misjudged friendliness, the testimonies kept piling up, brick by brick, creating a case not in court, but in the court of public opinion. But the story doesn't stop there. What came next would rock not just Ellis's image, but the very foundation of the church itself. Now here's where the conversation takes a sharp turn. Many of Bishop Ellis's defenders argue that what's happening to him isn't just a downfall, it's a targeted takedown. A witch hunt driven by jealousy, power struggles, and a society that's increasingly eager to watch faith leaders fall from grace. It's no secret that influential church figures are under microscopic scrutiny. Every sermon, every post, every word spoken is weaponized in today's cancel culture. But others see something deeper at play. Some view this as divine accountability, a reckoning, a moment where the veil is being lifted from ministries built on charisma, not character, where the leaders who've forgotten the weight of their platform are being reminded, harshly, that leadership in the church is not just about gifting, but integrity, humility, and transparency. And this isn't just about Bishop Ellis. This is about a pattern we've seen far too often. Pastors living dual lives, congregations left shattered, and the reputation of the church dragged through the mud, all while the world watches, entertained by the drama. So, what are we really witnessing here? A man being crucified unfairly by social media mobs? Or a long overdue moment of truth for a spiritual leader who lost his way? Conclusion. The final word. Let's be real. Bishop Ellis's downfall, whether you believe it's deserved or overblown, raises urgent questions for every church leader today. Are they truly living the life they preach about behind closed doors? Are they serving their flocks or simply building brands? And most importantly, what happens when the platform becomes more powerful than the purpose? Because whether we like it or not, the church is under the spotlight, and not just from critics or the media, but from God himself. And if there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. Your title can't save you, your influence can't protect you, your followers won't cover you. Only character, humility, and true accountability will keep you standing. And maybe, just maybe, what's happening to Bishop Ellis is less about his fall and more about a warning to others still standing, before they fall too.